Seven Blue Skies channel presents Paranormal, Book 4, Part 4, Legend of the Cannibal by Dr. Ahmed Khalid Tawfiq. This is the finale of Book 4, so make sure to listen to the end to find out what happens, and to see Dr. Rifat in action. 7. The Secret. And here ends the chain of letters about this story which I still keep. And as the reader will notice, it is divided into two. Letters exchanged between me and Adil, as Adil had sent me those letters I had written to him to add to my collection, and letters between Professor Cathrell and his peer, the Egyptian doctor Mohammed Shaheen, a copy of which I eventually managed to obtain. Then one letter to my brother Rida, which I never actually sent. And now there is no avoiding returning to my usual narrative style and depending again on my memory to recreate the events. The reader must have understood from my conversation with Adil that he has a specific theory about the Alexandrian serial killer, the theory he hoped to prove with my help. Come with me to our last stopping point. He and I were sitting in his car in the dark, and raindrops were still falling on the windshield, and the streets of Alex were totally empty of pedestrians. This is where I had ended my letter to Rida, right? Then let's continue. With surprise, I said to Adil, "And how will I lead you to the serial killer? I only know one way, which is for me to be him." In the darkness of the car he laughed, and his eyes shone by the light of the street lamps as he said, "Listen, let's have some dinner at home first, and then I'll explain to you." After Siham, who didn't seem entirely comfortable with me, removed the dishes from the table and little Ashraf fell asleep in his chair, Adil asked her to take the child to bed and leave us for a while. I leaned towards him, whispering, "Did you tell her about the thing with Huwaida? She seems to hate me already." "Any fool could see that you didn't give the girl any attention," he said, while peeling an orange and placing it on my plate. "After all, she is her sister." He then lit a cigarette and started explaining to me, saying, "Now, let's go back to our topic at hand. I was telling you about these mysterious crimes invading Alexandria and how we couldn't take one step towards the perpetrator. I was in this situation when I received your first letter. And this letter had offered me a solution on a silver platter. You live next to a mysterious, skinny neighbor whose complexion is very strange. This description is not foreign to our ears. We heard this today from the coffeehouse boy, remember? And what else? His blue car, his traveling to Alex a lot. And notice this. A neighbor who eats something spicy in the middle of the night and bangs on something in the early hours of dawn and can't stand cake. A neighbor who throws human bones in the ventilation shaft. A neighbor who claims to be an officer in the Marines, which is a lie. A neighbor who looks like someone with kidney failure, with rough hands and mutilated fingerprints. I think you understand now what I mean." Stunned, I said, "So you think—" "Yes, I do think. I'm not certain, that's why I only think." "And now imagine with me. This young man who's sick with an unknown disease travels several times to Alexandria and waits in a dark alley until a bum or passerby approaches, then jumps him and kills him, and very carefully removes chunks of flesh and whatever can be cut off the limbs, placing it in a bag and then returning to Cairo. And here the real party starts. At night he starts chopping, using a mallet or cleaver, adding spices and cooking, then throws the leftover bones in the air shaft. A stomach accustomed to eating human flesh can't stand cake, and therefore we can understand not opening the apartment door at night, no matter who the knocker is. And we can understand his mysterious nightly excursions to dispose of any remains that can't be eaten. And from his hardened hands and frightful features, those of a flesh-eater, we can see the results of his violent handiwork from his using the cleaver all night." With my stomach knotting up as I tried to swallow this story, I whispered, "Oh my God." But I gathered my nerves and said, "And the tickets? Why not travel in his car or with a train membership?" Swallowing a segment of orange, Adil said, "He's smart. He knows that the car will be an obvious thing that's easy to trace, and that it wouldn't be hard to find someone who takes down the license plate number and reports it to us. As for the season ticket for the train, he will expect in such circumstances that we are looking for someone who travels to Alex regularly, and he is extra careful to blend in here, because there are hundreds of others who do so. As for the tickets, he keeps them until they pile up and then throws them in the garbage, not expecting a nosy neighbor, like you, to be looking through his trash." "And the bones?" I asked. "Why not throw them far away?" Sighing in surrender, Adil replied, "That's the weak point in my theory. Why not throw them away, outside the circle of suspicion? Anyway, it's hard to know the complicated psychological motives that move a cannibal, for he might be meticulous one second and negligent the next. I don't know. Anyway, it's just a theory that lacks proof." At the time, I was thinking with disgust how I was alone at night with this beast. I had actually hoped for his friendship some day. And now, the horror I had left behind in England, Romania, Scotland, and even Kafr Badr had followed me even to my calm apartment. Looking at the chandelier above us, I asked Adil, "And did he tell you that Azit traveled to Alex today?" "What do you mean?" asked Adil. "Who told us?" "The sweet potato cart vendor on our street, of course. Surely he is one of your men." He looked at me with surprise, and a subtle, devious smile played on his mouth as he said, "What's this nonsensical talk?" In a cold tone I said, "It's not nonsense. That potato vendor showing up on our upscale street for the first time in 20 years can mean only one thing. He's an undercover cop, and you didn't do a good job placing him undercover." Laughing heartily, Adil said between his teeth, "You're pretty smart, and I hope Azat is not as smart." "Since when?" I asked. "How long have you been watching him?" "Since January 19th, so about 3 months now. Ever since you started writing to me and we identified the prints on the bone. And, by the way, the potato vendor is not the only one. After a high-level classified meeting in which we studied your letters and my speculations and doubt, about 10 undercover cops have actually been sent from a police station in your neighborhood." "And the result?" I asked. "Negative," he said. "Either we're wrong or, like you, Azat noticed our man. He has stopped going out at night. And add to that your stupidity in the way you took his fingerprints on the cup, which may have alerted him to our being on to him." "And did he travel to Alex tonight? Is he going back to our building with his bag of cursed things?" "We don't know yet," he answered. "My men haven't given their reports. That's why I'm waiting next to the phone." I then asked, "And why not raid his apartment tonight and confiscate everything you find?" "You don't understand the law," he said, and then rose and started pacing the room while contemplating the floor. "This serial killer is a citizen, and he has rights, and we can't raid his apartment without probable cause and the DA's permission, something I don't expect to get." He then turned to me, saying quickly, "Another thing worth mentioning. The respectable professor who visited your flat, Mohammed Shaheen." "Yeah, what about that nosy guy?" I asked shortly. "We have our ways of knowing he had asked the doorman about someone named Sarwat or Talat living in your building, and the doorman, who doesn't like you very much, volunteered your name and told him you're strange and do weird stuff. And the neighbors volunteered more accusations about you. The tenants of your building really hate you. And I wonder. So, armed with that, the man visited you as described in your letter dated March 17th. Now, consider with me what happened. The man seemed scared for no reason, inexplicably cautious. He stared keenly at the cannibal statue and at your food, and even asked for a sample of it, and then practically passed out watching you eat the meat. That man acted like he knew he was in a cannibal's apartment. With surprise, as it had seemed to me that everything the man did was logical, I said, "Oh, now I understand, and that's why he told everyone he knows that he was coming to visit me." "Also," Adil continued, "if you consider the situation, you would get it. He was looking for a Sarwat or a Rafat, so the doorman gave him your name, Rifat. Actually, he was looking for Azat, and both of them, Rifat and Azat, are complicated weirdos who live alone. Which means that Professor Mohammed Shaheen is, like us, searching for the same thing and the same person. He holds the other end of the thread that we hold here, and from the center of that thread hangs Azat. Therefore, we need to know exactly what this professor knows." I sat silent and overloaded, which made Adil ask me what was wrong. So I said, "It's my damn neighbors. I've always treated them very politely and decently. And you see what they think of me? Me? I'm a cannibal? Egyptians don't like reclusive people, Adil offered. This type is not comforting to them. They understand one being rude or loud, but think poorly of someone who is polite, reclusive, and odd. Sighing while relaxing in my chair, I asked, "And now, have you searched for this Mohammed Shaheen?" "We have information that he is a respectable professor, clean as a whistle. Nothing suspicious about him except for his extreme politeness, which reaches the level of naivete. But we haven't yet asked him about the source of his information. As for Azat, we know nothing about him, his relatives, his current or previous job, nothing except his going to the market and to the bank, where he withdraws from an unknown account containing £8,000. Nor do we know his nightly destination, as I've said before. And now," and here the phone rang. So my heart jumped into my throat, and Adil startled. But he got a grip on himself and put the receiver to his ear. It was 2 a.m. He said. "They lost him? Idiots. He evaded them? 1 a.m.? Yes, and then what? Ah, Alat said that? Are you sure? Okay, thanks." Putting the phone down slowly, he raised his head, and signs of happiness showed on his face. "Do you know what happened?" he asked. "I guess he managed to evade your men upon going out. So they can't confirm his traveling to Alex. But Alat, who must be one of your undercover men, found some clear proof against him at 1 a.m. Spitefully, he roared, "If you don't stop pretending to be smart, I won't tell you anything." Okay, I won't try to deduce anything. Just tell me." "They're saying he lost them when he went out." "That's what I said," I mumbled. "But they saw him returning home at 1 a.m. carrying a large, heavy bag, and of course wearing dark clothing. Most importantly," he continued, looking at me smugly, "he had a Band-Aid on his cheek." 8. A Little Adventure. When my vacation ended, Adil shook my hand and hugged me, and Siham also shook my hand coldly. Even that little devil Ashraf brought his tiny mouth towards my cheek, so I bent down for him to be able to kiss it. Adil said, "And now, remember what I told you, and take care of yourself." He then led me to the door and whispered to me, "And think again about the subject of Huwaida. You need a wife to take care of you, and she needs a man to protect her. Also, she's not so bad." And on the staircase, he kept repeating what we had agreed upon, saying, "Your phone must be working by now, so call me regularly. And don't worry about anything. Our men are observing every little detail, and one signal is enough for any of them to destroy this guy." It was April 8th, and my vacation in beautiful Alexandria had lasted no more than 3 days. But I still have the chance to go back, after this nightmare ends. And in my room I sat listening to the radio and amusing myself by drawing in an old notebook I found. I tried in vain, but any face I drew was Maggie's dear face. She had even taken control over my fingers and my pen. How can all these men live happily and content while Maggie is only married to one of them? Midnight. It's time. I turned up the radio so anybody eavesdropping on me would know I was at home. Then I got dressed and put on my sneakers, picked up my flashlight and my licensed gun, and maybe the reader remembers the last time I wore such an outfit was in the demon caller meeting on that awful night in my village, Kafr Badr. I then stood behind the door listening until I heard the sound of the lock opening on my neighbor's apartment and the sound of familiar footsteps going down the stairs. I turned off the lights so he wouldn't see my shadow and went out to the balcony and saw him walking, without luggage, in the dark. And when he reached the end of the street, I saw a shadow moving behind him, the undercover cop, standing watch in the night, doing his job well. Adil was right when he expected Azat would return to his mysterious night outings after the last crime, because he had to dispose of the remains left in his apartment. But I didn't understand the reason why he carried nothing in his hand. Now, it's time. I opened my apartment door carefully and walked to Azat's door. From my pocket, I took out a master key that Adil had given me, which opens all kinds of locks. I carefully slid it into the keyhole and turned it, and click, the door opened without difficulty. And now, should I enter? Idle had told me to tell the undercover police on the night I would go inside Azat's apartment, so that they would watch the entrance of the building for me, in case he came back suddenly. But I found this overly cautious. It would only take 5 minutes, after which it would all be over. Also, the success of this little adventure was contingent upon not involving the police in anything which could give a clever lawyer the space to get this case dismissed in front of a court of law some day. So I entered, and of course I didn't turn on the lights. I turned on the flashlight in the apartment, calmly scanning the walls, and some strange organic smell filled the air, making me nauseated. And in the living room I saw the thing Professor Shaheen was looking for in my apartment, a group of African statues standing on a table in the center of the room, and several odd paintings hung on the walls. With my heart pounding, I started checking each room. His bedroom was messy and chaotic. Next to the bed, some books and magazines, and on the wall, in an old frame, was a picture of some girl, and next to that, a newspaper clipping giving the news of a petroleum company's plane crashing in the western desert. At the time, I didn't understand the meaning of this newspaper clip. In the corner of the room, a desk caught my attention. On it were various white human bones, a skull, ribs, thigh bones, a humerus, and vertebrae. And here, some wire and a pair of pliers, which implies an attempt at attaching some parts to each other, something we used to practice during our youth in medical school. Is that enough? No. I had left the real goal here to the end. I have to see the kitchen and open the refrigerator. I entered the kitchen and found it messy, like all the rooms in this apartment. The sink full of plates, exactly as he had told me. And on the kitchen counter lay a big knife, then soft human hands, the color of human death. I had found what we were looking for. Overcoming my disgust, I opened the refrigerator. The shelves filled with miscellaneous human body parts, the flesh still attached. I dared not touch anything, nor let anything touch me, although I am a doctor. The horror of the situation had dissolved all my scientific logic. I have to run. I must return to my safe apartment, lock my door, and tell Idle everything. And here I heard the outer door being opened with the key. The man had come back. Freezing in my tracks, my thinking evaporated totally. I just managed to shut off my flashlight and then ran to the bathroom, opened the door, entered, and closed it behind me. It was completely dark inside until my eyes adjusted to the dim lighting. I could discern heinous objects filling the bathtub. I heard the sound of his steps in the living room and the sound of him opening several doors as if looking for an intruder. The steps grew close to the bathroom door, so I froze behind the shower curtain. I heard him shout in a loud voice, as if speaking to someone he was sure was present. "Come out of your hiding place. I know you're here. I saw your flashlight from the street." What a fool I was to have entered the apartment without telling anyone, and a fool not to pull the curtains over the windows before turning on my flashlight. Now there's no escape. It's my battle alone which will determine everything. Taking out my handkerchief, I tied it around my face as a makeshift bandana so he would not recognize me, if both of us survived the impending struggle. And in a split second, I jumped out on him like a rabid person. The fear had strengthened my viciousness. With my fists, I pounded the back of his head and then directed a kick into his abdomen. And before he understood what was happening, I punched him in the nose with all my might. He went down like a pierced balloon behind me as I started running. The dark living room, the African statues, the door, the lock, the corridor, and then my apartment. I don't know how much time I spent lying on my bed, stunned. I had no idea who I was or where I was. My heart jumped like a horse in my chest, like a heart whose arteries are not supplying sufficient oxygen. Dizziness, darkness. And when I came to, I stood up and went swaying to the phone, calling a number in Alexandria. Next morning, still exhausted, I sat with my students in the lecture room at my university, explaining to them the symptoms of pernicious anemia. And here, someone knocked placidly at the lecture room door. I was fully prepared to scold this late student with stern words before letting him in. But the door opened carefully, revealing a bald head wearing strange, thick glasses, and the look of surprise drawn on the face of Professor Mohammed Shaheen as he regarded me in the midst of my students. "You? And you?" "I didn't," he stammered. "I didn't believe it until I saw it with my own eyes." "Okay," I replied. "Come, have a seat while I finish my lecture, and then we'll talk. I have to apologize to you." "As do I," he said. And with that, he sat with the students following my lecture, and I could almost hear the thoughts running in his head. After the students left, he sat next to me and opened his mouth to speak, but I interrupted him, saying, "I'm not the cannibal you're looking for. That's all. Your man is Azet, not Rifat, and I apologize." "I asked about you," he replied, "and they told me you were here. I was sure the Rifat Ismail they spoke of was someone else." And we started exchanging explanations, which lit all corners of this story like the sun. He apologized to me for his rudeness and intrusiveness, and I apologized to him for throwing him out of my apartment like a bag of trash. He related to me the story of the engineer Shaker, and I told him what I could of Azet Sharif's story without giving out important secrets. And when we separated on a promise to be continuously in touch, we had become friends. Adil's plan had neared its conclusion, and though he scolded me on the phone for my stupidity, we were both reassured that yesterday's incident didn't result in irrevocable results, and that Azet would think a professional thief had visited his apartment for some reason and surely dared not call the police, to avoid their inspecting his apartment. Or so we thought. And, as usual, I was naive. 9. The confrontation. At 5 p.m. I had just finished my dinner when the doorbell rang. I hadn't paid the monthly rent yet, so expected to find the doorman. I went into the bedroom and took £3 from my suit jacket pocket, then went to the door and opened it. It was Azet. He stood there placidly, hands in his pockets, a smile playing on his mouth, and his nose swollen from last night's punch, with 2 pieces of gauze stuffed into his nostrils. He wasn't really repulsive, but I feared him a lot. I never expected him to visit me in the afternoon. "Would you allow me to come in?" I didn't know what to say. I had never refused his entrance before, so no need to stir his suspicion in this particular instance. I waved him in with a nod, and he entered slowly while regarding me with a steady gaze. "Were you eating?" he asked. "No." "Well, anyway," he said, "I won't waste your time. It's the bachelor's life, I know." And he took his hand from his pocket to show me something. "Is this yours?" His open hand held a flashlight. The flashlight I carried when entering his apartment last night. The flashlight I had forgotten in the bathroom while hiding there, escaping from the apartment and forgetting all about it. And now, I would tell a white lie, but he wouldn't believe it. I opened my mouth, but he said sternly, "Don't lie. I know it well. I noticed it on your table next to its batteries and turned it in my hand on my first visit here. Thing is, I've never seen one quite like it. I've never seen a flashlight made in Romania. I stammered. Thus, everything is clear to me now." And then he looked into my eyes steadily and hissed between his teeth, "Now, will you kindly explain? What compelled you to sneak into my apartment last night? And why did you try to kill me and almost broke my nose?" I noticed his left hand emerge from his pocket holding an ugly knife, which he waved in my face, saying, "Speak! The time for masks is gone." He had no reason for fake friendliness anymore, and I had no time to pretend being naive. He knows that I know that he knows. The only thing left for me now is screaming. But I will delay that until the last moment. Frantically, I yelled, "Get away from me, Azet, you cannibal!" "What?" came his confused answer. "Listen, my friend," I started. "You're in a bind here. A whole platoon of cops is surrounding the building, prepared to rip you apart as soon as they hear a shout from me. Just one shout. So give me the weapon before someone gets hurt." Signs of true surprise showed on his face as he asked, "What is this nonsense? What policeman? And what? Are my eyes tricking me, or is he shaking? Trembling with drops of cold sweat on his cheeks. His eyes moved with nystagmus. His lips spasmed, and then he fell to the ground like a bull succumbing to his wounds at the hands of a matador. As my first move, I took the knife from his loosening grip, and then started checking on him. This kid is really sick and isn't faking. But what's wrong with him? Tachycardia, cold sweat, generalized fatigue. I didn't know the reason for all this, but I wouldn't let him die like a dog in front of me, even if he were a cannibal. I hurried to retrieve my blood pressure gauge, wrapped it around his arm, and started listening. But this kid has got to be joking. This can't possibly be his true blood pressure. Whispering weakly, he said, "Hurry, cortisone." Okay. This beast knows the medication he needs. And disregarding whether my decision was correct or hasty, I picked up 2 ampules of cortisone and a syringe. There was no time to sterilize it, but anyway, it was still unused. So I broke the 2 ampules, filled the syringe, and emptied it into his vein. And he started improving without a doubt. I don't know if this was because of his good luck or my bad luck. Although I had a reasonable theory about the truth of what had happened in front of me, it still lacked the proof, which this miserable guy would present to me when he recovered. We sat at the dining table exchanging looks. He sat still shaking at one end of the table, staring at me weakly, and I on the other end, waving my gun while regarding him tensely with doubt. 15 minutes passed while we sat in this position. With as cruel a voice as I could muster, I said, "And now?" He didn't reply and just looked down, so I continued, "You are sick with Addison's disease. Isn't that right?" "Yes," he mumbled. "That's the name they told me." He said it while lifting his head towards me with surprise, and I said, "And you can't stand any kind of psychological or physical stress, and you have diarrhea all the time." "Yes, exactly." "That explains a lot," I said, "because Addison's disease results from the adrenal gland's inability to produce cortisone, and the result is severe fatigue, generalized weakness, low blood pressure, unusual roughness of the hands, and the dusky complexion that stirred my suspicions. Your status is now clear, and the only cure is cortisone. And you know that better than me, but it's a lifelong treatment, and I think your need for spices is related to your disease." Looking at his hands, he said, "It's this mad craving for salt. Sometimes it almost drives me crazy." Putting my gun on the table within my reach, I told him confidently, "That's because your body needs sodium, the substance it lacks in Addison's disease. And maybe that's also why your stomach can't handle sweets. And I think this disease is the reason for your depression, isolation, and odd demeanor and behavior, because it also has psychological effects." He shook his head in agreement and distress, and after a short period of silence, I lit a cigarette and told him, "And now, there are certain things I don't get. Why did you resign from your job after the plane crash? Why did you change your name and address?" Looking at me in disbelief, he exclaimed, "How did you know?" "I know just about everything about you. And now, answer my question." Lifting his gaze to the ceiling, he sighed and said, "The symptoms of this illness had started showing on me. My looks and my personality started changing. And I didn't want to see signs of disgust or pity on the faces of those I love. I didn't want to hurt them with my hand or tongue. So I left my old world to another land that doesn't know my name or face. I changed my retirement plan and sold a small piece of land and have lived off the money until today. And thus I avoided all my neighbors." "Another question," I prompted. "What were you eating in the desert before they rescued you?" Signs of disgust showed on his face, and he mumbled, "Anything, mice, snakes, lizards. As for my colleagues, they had died, and the wolves took care of them. I knew of the rules of survival and proper nutrition from my time in the military, so I managed to stay pretty healthy." "Ah," I said, "and another part of your riddle is clear to me." "Just a second," he interjected. "What gives you the right to interrogate me?" I lifted my gun towards him and said, "Because I'm the one who's carrying the gun, and if you were the one holding it, you would have the right to know everything about me." "Another question. How did you come soaked with rain that night, when it hadn't rained?" "I never said for a second that it was rain. I was trying to fix the shower head, and you know about my constant problems with plumbing in my apartment." Throwing my cigarette to the floor, trying to look fierce, I said, "I still have more questions. How do you explain the bones you threw in the ventilation shaft, and your mysterious night outings, and more importantly, the dismembered human body parts filling your flat, your bedroom, the kitchen, the bathtub?" He regarded me sharply and mumbled, fists clenched, "Since when does the thief ask the homeowner for an explanation about the contents of the home?" Standing up, truly nervous, I kicked the chair over and shouted, You still don't understand, you butcher, that you're finished? The police know everything about you. The murder victim in Alexandria is the last human flesh you will ever taste in your life." Human flesh? He wondered. Tasted? And he began contemplating my words and then burst into laughter, laughing at my words, questions, and accusations, laughing while drawing raggedy breaths. And then he stood up, unconcerned about my gun, held my arm and gently, as if taking a child to the amusement park, invited me to accompany him to his apartment. Retreating a few steps, I ordered, "You walk in front of me." In his bleak apartment, Azit invited me to the kitchen, opened the fridge, pulled out those chunks of human flesh, and invited me to touch them. I hesitated, but he insisted, and he pressed a finger into one of them. To my amazement, I noticed the clear trace of his finger deep within the flesh. "Do you see that?" he asked. "This is molding clay. All the pieces you saw last night are molding clay from my larger statue attempts. You see, I practice sculpture on a wide scale, and I think by the light of your flashlight, fear controlling you, you lost the ability to differentiate." I was astonished, but I insisted on making sure, down to the last piece of clay I found in the bathtub. My autopsy was meticulous. There was no doubt about it. They were all benign pieces of molding clay. And for the first time in an hour, I found no reason for my gun, so I put it in my pocket. I had lost most of my hostility towards him, if not all of it. And I asked him, "And the bones? Do you have an explanation for that?" Sitting on the edge of the bathtub, he smiled wearily and said soberly, "I lost my roots and friends when I got this chronic disease, and so, in my loneliness, I decided to reinvent myself. I had always wanted to be a genius artist like Auguste Rodin. Do you know of him?" "No," I admitted. "He's a genius French sculptor. You've surely seen his Thinker statue at least." And as he sat on the edge of the bathtub, he put his fist under his chin and frowned, imitating that famous statue I would surely know. Rodin reached such an amazing level of simulating anatomy that they accused him of making his statues of bronze cast over real human models, and they accused him of using human bones to make the frames for his sculptures. And I knew that all of them, Michelangelo, Rodin, and Mukhtar, had studied anatomy carefully before studying the art of sculpture, and thus I decided to start out like them. I got these bones from a medical student and started studying them. But I'm not normal, and my moments of despair are endless, maybe because of my illness. And so many times I have been frustrated and threw everything in my hand into the air shaft. And that's the reason for the bones piling up there." "And your constant night outings?" I prompted. "I'm telling you, I'm not normal," he answered. "This disease has made me pretty unsteady. Sometimes I feel like I'll go mad if I don't leave these four walls closing in on me." "Well," I said, "there still remains the topic of your constant trips to Alexandria." "Silly question," he quipped. "Why would any sculptor travel to Alexandria? Alex is the melody of art, the eternal mixture of Roman art, Pharaonic art, and Islamic art. Alexandria is the source of my muse, and if I don't see it at least twice a week, I'll go crazy." "And why not travel with your car?" "Weird question," he said. "It's my personal freedom, I think, and you can't blame a guy who can't drive well or prefers the train, for example." "That's true," I conceded. And then I started pondering other curious points and said, "And of course, the hammering sounds at night were the result of your sculpting activity?" "True," he said, "and I confess that being a neighbor to an artist is pretty annoying." And so this miserable guy was a bunch of contradictions and strange behaviors which could not be explained except under this terrible light, that he was a cannibal. And how wrong we were, and how scared we became for no good reason. And here I remember Adil's confident voice saying people never understand the reclusive one. They might accept the rude one or the obnoxious one, but the reclusive, polite one must necessarily stir their suspicions. But who is the Alexandrian serial killer? 10. The serial killer. And now we observe the last scenes for the Alexandrian serial killer. The time, 12 noon on May 6, 1965. Place, a narrow, dirty alley in a far-flung neighborhood whose name I won't mention. Police cars filled with cops blocking one of the alley's entrances, and 3 or 4 cars parked in a row on the other end. Some curious onlookers watching what's happening. But the cops pushed them away sternly, helping empty the scene further. Adil stood next to his open car door while I sat in the passenger seat, tense and shrinking, as Adil had insisted on my seeing the end of this story. A cop approached, fixing the magazine in his machine gun, and other stuff. I don't know what exactly. I'm not a firearms expert, but I always see them in the movies doing the exact same thing. Click, clack, click. This fearful sound which tells you that a shotgun is now a live, murderous tool. I looked up at Adil, who stood looking fierce and dignified with his hands on his waist, and I said, "Adil, I'm scared." "That's nothing new." "Well, aren't you going to call him with the megaphone?" I prompted. Propping his foot up on the frame of the car, he smiled sarcastically and said, "Yeah, I will." "And why not ask him to surrender, like, 'The cops are surrounding you, Morsi'?" "You watch too many movies, Rifat," he said. "You're naive." He then raised his voice, shouting, "I want 3 or 4 here. We're not joking around." And instantly 3 cops jumped up and stood near a ground floor window, and I heard that ominous sound again, click, crack, click, and the blood froze in my veins. A massacre is about to take place right here, in a few seconds. "And now?" I asked Adil. "Who is he?" Lighting a cigarette, he responded, "His name is Saleh Mahmoud. He is an unemployed, broke psychopath." "And who snitched him out?" "His landlord's wife doubted his behavior and his keeping all these knives, and then she found drops of blood on the stairs, and so—" "And why did he do all this?" I wondered. "My friend," he answered, "you can't understand a serial killer's thinking. Some of them have psychological problems. Some of them suffer with psychosis and delusions of persecution. Some are just looking for fame. And some are sadists. That's his problem, not ours." I sighed with sadness and said, "And I suffered risks and torture for a guess which was never even a reality. And I accused a sensitive, sick young man of the most horrendous crimes. I even gave him a hard beating." "You're not alone," Adil answered. "Actually, Dr. Shaheen and I, and all of our men who froze in the winter nights watching that kid, missed the answer right under our noses here in Alex. Well, anyway," I went on, "it's unprecedented that all these deceptive appearances gathered, and if Sherlock Holmes was in our place, he would have done the same thing." Adil considered and then said, "The idea of cannibalism really was too much and unnecessary. He's just a normal serial killer, if that expression can fly." And here I heard the sound of the men raising their guns, and we raised our eyes to see the man moving across the roof of this decrepit building. He swayed and stretched out his arms to keep his balance. His face was that of a young man's face you see everywhere and every day, despite his weird complexion. He was wearing a pullover and dirty pajama pants ripped at the knees. Adil turned to a cop standing nearby and shouted, "Saad, get him!" And instantly Saad swept into the building's dirty entrance and disappeared in the darkness. I said to Adil, "He looks human." He looked at me quickly, saying, "And what did you expect? A serial killer is not necessarily someone with disheveled hair and beard and crazed looks, someone who runs about the streets brandishing a knife and drooling." And here echoed the screams coming from the rooftop. Adil looked to his men, and instantly they all ran to the building's entrance, and I heard the sound of a fight, without any gunfire luckily, and I shrunk back from the scene even farther. The sound of someone crying for help, the sound of punches, swear words, and shouts, and then the men appeared holding something resembling a wild dog. It was Saleh in the middle of them, his eyes swollen and blood running from his mouth. He was unbelievably agitated, threatening, and refusing to walk, so they were practically dragging him. A pair of handcuffs appeared, and in seconds the cuffs were around his wrists. I don't know why his overall appearance reminded me of vicious dogs, the police dogs which the handlers control with a leather collar attached to a long iron bar. And I was shaking just imagining the result if he escaped the cop's grip. And suddenly, before I knew what was happening, the man pushed the cop holding the other end of the chain in his chest and dropped him to the ground. And almost in the same second, he smashed the window of a first-floor window, breaking the glass into small fragments, picking up a shard of glass and jumping on me as I stood near the car. All this happened in less than 2 seconds, so no one could do anything. And I felt the man twisting my arm behind me and the sharp piece of glass to my neck. Over my carotid artery, unfortunately. The rabid dog had escaped his master. With a crazed look, he shouted, "No one come near me, or I'll slaughter him like a sheep." I felt the piece of glass pressing into my neck, almost penetrating it. He was vicious, and his fear made him even more monstrous. I felt his rapid, tobacco-tainted breathing attacking my nose. And he was definitely strong. The men retreated slowly, in confusion, and even Adil seemed like he didn't know what to do. "That's right, like that," the man screamed. "Move these cars away from the entrance." And I'm not strong, but I hate for someone to use me in obstructing justice. Nor do I appreciate someone I don't know calling me a sheep. I also despise rudeness and lack of manners. In seconds, I made my decision, and in a flash, I executed it. I threw myself backwards to get away from the piece of glass at my neck, and I twisted my arm opposite his grip and lifted my foot, kicking the leg on which he was balancing. He fell to the ground and, before understanding anything, 10 police officers pinned him to the ground and cuffed him, with a few punches to counter his enthusiasm. I didn't hear the congratulating words, nor did I hear Adil's laughing talk while he patted my shoulder, and I also didn't hear my heart beat. I was looking for a place to pass out. The ending. After we attended his exhibition in Goethe's art gallery in Alexandria, Adil and I realized that Azat Sharif had reached the pinnacle of his art. He was standing there, thin, with his strange complexion, but high-spirited, talking to pretty girls and a man or two from the press, and he was shining like a star. And when he asked my opinion about his first exhibition, I said, "I'll tell you a story. I don't know where I read it. A sculptor was making a statue of a woman, and he wanted to reach perfection with it. And so he kept on practicing and practicing his craft, year after year, for a whole decade until he finished. And then he stood and looked at it, frightened, and shouted, 'Oh my God, it looks alive,' and then fell to the floor, dead in an instant." He looked at me gloomily and said, "It's a silly story anyway, and, as usual, I don't get what you're trying to say." "Me neither," I conceded. "For some reason I just remembered this story." "Maybe it's madness," said Azat, "or a warning against striving for perfection." And here I felt Adil pulling my arm to present me to a gorgeous girl who smiled shyly, and I heard him say, "Sorry to end your conversation. This is Dr. Rifat, Huwaida, and this is Huwaida, Rifat. I hope you haven't forgotten each other." Really taken aback, surprised that I hadn't noticed her beauty that night, I said, "Maybe she forgot me. As for me, impossible." Maybe I was hasty in my prior decision. It seemed that the time had come for me to grow up and be like others who speak of the trappings of engagement, and rings and furniture and these terrible secrets. It seemed that the time had come for me to settle down, or so I told myself, and I didn't realize how naive I was. For I was set to travel to the West Indies in 2 months' time and would meet there a new nightmare of a special kind. But that's another story. Cairo, May 1992. Signed, Dr. Rifat Ismail. Finale and end of Part 4.